Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Speaking Legally, where the legal meets the cultural. We're here with you every Wednesday, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So we thank you for tuning in, for being a part of our dialogue and our conversation. We did announce a special guest that was coming on today, but due to his schedule, he will be with us next week. So make sure you mark your calendars. Dr. Jeff Gardere, America's favorite psychologist, will be with us next week on the 12th. But today is Cinco de Mayo, so welcome to our broadcast. I know that some of you might not be celebrating the way that you normally do on Cinco de Mayo, even if you don't have any Mexican heritage. But be safe wherever you are, what you're doing, and we thank you for spending your afternoon with us. Hey, Deb. Always great to see you. So before we jump in to our conversation today, let's give our co-host an opportunity to greet you. Señor Pichardo, happy Cinco de Mayo.
Yeah, hola, hola. Feliz día 5 de mayo a todos mis compatriotas mexicanos y otros latinos. Welcome. Happy May 5th. Just watch that tequila a little bit though, because we used to go out to the bar and do that, and if you're sitting at home, you might go a little overboard. But other than that, welcome everyone. Thank you for viewing us today. I hope you find the information educational, fulfilling, as well as helpful.
A little Don Q no hurt nobody. But Senor Russell.
Yeah, well, you got to get the Don Q in. We're glad that you're staying at home, right? So you're not socializing the way that
drunk driving.
Right. So we don't have to worry about the DWIs. So welcome everybody, and we don't have to worry about that because if you're drinking in your living room, I think you can navigate to that back room.
We hope so, because restaurants are open and time has been extended. So I hope that everyone is staying safe. If you do go out and socialize, the rain might deter some people who are living in the New York, New Jersey area, but be safe wherever you are. So once again, another month has begun. We're in season 2 of Speaking Legally, and clearly the headlines don't stop coming with the things that we need to discuss. And we know that there's still a lot of conversation going on post the Chauvin trial and what has happened. And the latest thing in the news is talk of, I guess there was a filing deadline for an appeal. And what was thrown in was that the juror, Brandon Mitchell, is being looked at because of his participation in a DC march and could appeal, legal experts say. Well, let's see what our legal experts say. Did you all see this? And what say you about this juror and the Derek Chauvin case?
Well, first, let me just say, when you talk about appeals, there is appeals where the court can rule that there was harmless error. And that terminology I'll define. Harmless error means that, yes, you have a grounds for appeals, but all the things taken in totality, everything taken in consideration, the error is harmless, right? So let's say a judge fails to give an instruction, but defense counsel was able to make the same point by way of cross-examination, or the instruction is in totality of everything is useless. So the court can always find harmless error. So the issue before the court now in this appeal is whether or not the conflict or the fact that this juror participated in a march on Washington to talk about the voters' right of Martin Luther King versus George Floyd matter, is that enough for there to be grounds to overturn the verdict? And my opinion, Ed, before you jump in, is no way, no how. The courts are very, very reluctant to deal with jurors and deal with judges and deal with jurors as far as their mental makeup unless they lied. And this individual, to me, did not lie. He answered all the questions that was on the questionnaire. I mean, there may be a case, I don't want to say this too loud, where, Chauvin can assert some malpractice because maybe his lawyer did not go into in depth in questioning that juror about his participation and about what Black Lives Matter means to him. He said it all in the questionnaire. He wrote it down. He was verbal about it. And I know as an attorney, and you know as an attorney, you don't pick any juror unless you get the consent of your client. And so the client consented to having him on the jury. So I don't know where they go. But sometimes it's about making noise and, throwing doubt. And in an appeal, you want to speak to all the issues and every issue that you can.
Well, I mean, for me, the key here is this, what you said earlier. It appears from the information that I've looked at that juror Brandon Mitchell was candid about his appearance at this particular rally or event. He seems to be claiming that he was there for voter education or voter registration, and not necessarily for the issue of anti-police and so forth. So just the very fact that he was candid about the appearing at this rally at that point gave defense counsel the opportunity to engage in certain questions that might at some point be grounds for getting the judge to remove him from the pool for grounds. Or at the very least, if you really, really feel that this is a jury that's not going to be impartial and is going to hurt your client in deliberations, then you have your preemptory strikes. But he was allowed to remain on that jury to hear the case and to engage in deliberation. It's going to be quite a bit of a hurdle. They're starting to now kind of make a big deal. Well, he had a certain T-shirt on that said Black Lives Matter and all this other stuff.
So now the T-shirt said, "Get your knee off my neck."
Yeah. So now it's the T-shirt that I'm wearing now that somehow conveys the mindset that I didn't reveal during the period that you were questioning me. Yeah, I think at the end of the day, I don't think this is going to rise to the level of a harmful error that will result in an overturning of a unanimous verdict on all three charges. I mean,
if you take that compared to the totality of the evidence presented, but although being a juror is highly important, you can win or lose a trial there. But once again, what you said, defense counsel has the opportunity to do his due diligence. In the day and age that we live in social media, and I know sometimes defense counsels do not have the budget to have numerous paralegals or other attorneys helping them co-counsel, unlike the government or the special prosecutor that can hire people at the whim and wish. You take a juror's name, you punch that juror's name into the computer, you find out about that juror. You have an investigator do what they can on social media hits. Here it is. Anything that Mr. Knight did wasn't a secret. It was out in public. It was there for the takings. It was there for the questioning. It was there for all eyes to see. And if you fail to do that, as my pops would say, you snooze, you lose. And you snoozing, and you definitely lost, so you're losing. And that's the way it goes.
Yeah, because I'm definitely in that heated atmosphere of trial. I mean, I've always regarded voir dire as one of the most important functions during trial in terms of that selection of that jury. I mean, and sometimes you got to listen. If you hear a ping, you got to follow that questioning and figure out whether or not you're going to ask more questions out of that juror, that potential juror, to set the ground and lay the ground for then saying to the judge, "Hey, listen, I think we've heard enough here. I think he needs to be removed."
He fell short on not using either one peremptory challenge for cause, saying that I find this juror to be biased, and so we want to preempt him. We want to strike him from this jury. We don't want him to be a part of this jury, and this is the reason why. Here, judge, he got this T-shirt on. He's at this. It says get your knee off my neck. I mean, like, it's all the points that that might be relevant to get a judge to consider. All right, let's remove him. Or without cause, he has those challenges. He can use them. He can say, "I don't care whether I like him or not, or in between. I just want him off." And that is that. And he didn't use them.
So what does this, of course, is being tried in the court of public opinion on what should happen. Do we really see this going in the direction of this being overturned? Will it pick up that much traction? Should this be something that we're, really thinking and looking into?
Well, the concern here is that I seriously doubt that those appellate judges that hear this appeal are going to allow themselves to be swayed by the court of public opinion or articles or commentary. But who knows? I mean, that brings up a very important topic, because this wasn't the only ground for appeal. Just for the audience, there were several other grounds for appeal, namely the statement that was made by the congresswoman out of California, Maxine Waters, and the effect that might have supposedly had, and the motion that was made to the judge concerning that, and that motion being denied. So that's an additional, ground that they're putting forth, for appeal.
Here it is. For me, there is things that are in the box of practicing law.
Yeah.
Evidentiary issues, right? The judge failed to do this. The judge misread the law. When the judge overruled my objection, that means he told me that my stopping of a various of questioning or answering by saying overrule means that it's allowed in. When he should have sustained it, that means he should have precluded it. Those are real legal issues that should be before the Court of Appeals or the appellate court, and that's the stuff that the court should decide.
When they allow in prejudicial evidence.
Right. Probative versus prejudicial, right? What we have here, hearsay or not, what we have here is what I call outside the box of the legal arena. So now, quasi the juror in his affiliation or non-affiliation, you had an opportunity to question. You failed to do that. You didn't preserve the record, even though you could have been denied. You could have said, Judge, I want him knocked out for cause. The judge could have said, no, I denied it. At least you preserved the record for an appeal. This is not something that you preserve. It is something that you're finding out late, right? And that's not necessarily within the appellate court's purview. Then you have Maxine Waters, right? Once again, outside of the box of litigation, not what's happening in the courtroom again. So therefore, outside of, one would say, the real jurisdiction of an appellate court. Then you have the settlement statement, the timing of it, the fact that it happened during the trial. Once again, outside of the arena of what's happening in the courtroom. I wouldn't 100% say this is a no-brainer, although I feel it should be a no-brainer. What you're looking at is three different things that are competing against one another. You're looking at things that have happened outside of the courtroom, which I would tell you does have some weight. Juror Waters, the statement. What happened inside the courtroom, I think that is clean as clean can be. So I think that's an L right there, but you have that. And then let's not forget, you have the time and space that we live in, whether it was President 45, whether it's the fact that this is the time that people are uprising, whether it's the time that, racism is at the forefront, ignorance is at the forefront. How does that play? And whether or not a court overturns this type of verdict. And those are three real data points that I'm sure that court is juggling around. And the one that should be most important, which is what happened in that courtroom, is really on the sidelines, because I don't think there's anything there. They're juggling the other two pieces.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I tend to agree. I mean, in my review most of the time of the case law, when it comes to a verdict being overturned, is usually related to a bad jury instruction. I don't know if you will agree with that.
Yeah, something
that's normally what I see that causes the overturning, when the judge states the law in error, an incomplete, insufficient, or erroneous jury instruction, where the defendant is able to say that the jurors weren't given the proper instructions to be able to come up with, what you would call a good verdict, But this sort of stuff right here, it's really, at the edges. I'd be surprised as well if Derek Chauvin's attorney, Derek Chauvin, is successful in this respect.
It's interesting because now this gentleman, his whole life is turned upside down because now he's all over the news. His name is being quoted, so that's a whole nother layer. Where's the protection of the rights of the juror?
Well, listen, I got. Well, I don't know. Didn't he voluntarily speak to the press about what he? His experience. I'm always a little like, why are you talking about your jury
rise to a place where the court overturns, but you never know. And so as Black folks, we know, people of color, you never know. So you got 10 fingers, you got 10 toes, keep them crossed, and make sure that you have the faith because you never know.
Yeah, I really wish Mr. Mitchell would kind of, stay out of the media spotlight here. I that's just me, when it comes to these jurors talking about their experience, especially a case like this, and just.
But Ed, this is the life. Here's the conflict that you and I live in, conflict that Dr. Grant lives in, right? We most of the time, not because it's just demographics, right? We know that our community is over policed. We know that we're more of a target than anyone else. So if our client base of people of color, we stand there as defense counsel or plaintiff's counsel, whether it's a false arrest civil rights case, and we're trying to put forth this case or trying to prevent someone from going to jail wrongfully. And we need jurors of color. And this is what I mean by the long game. You see behind you, we talk about cardiac arrest. I mean, it's all coming together as I put the thought in, and we've talked about this before. What's the long game? The long game is that if I can mess you up early on, and I'm gonna use the word mess, not the word with F. If I can do that early on to you, then you disengage in the process later on. And what is later on? There is no Mr. Knight. Because Mr. Knight is saying, yo, you jerked me when I was walking down the street. You grabbed me, you stripped me, you punched me in my face, you did all these things. No, I don't want to be involved in anything with the legal system. I'm out, right? So then you don't have a Mr. Knight. Then on the converse, what you have, and this is what I mean, long game versus short game, this happens to you, or it happened to somebody, or it wasn't that egregious, but you lived that type of life where you're a person of color in America, and this happens in a community that's over-policed, or in the suburbs when someone thinks the social economics doesn't fit your bill. You now become part of the justice system where you are a juror and you want to play a part, and you're trying to tell the truth as a jury, potential juror, or you're telling the truth as a potential juror, but we all know what happens behind door number one. This is what happens to us. So how do you get that jury of your peers, trial of your peers? How do you get that when you got me in the catch-22, as they say on 155th Street, the pump 52, like what you got me? I'm victimized one way. If I tell the truth, then I'm gonna be victimized the other way.
So let me get you straight, brother. What you're saying is that
this will help. Get me straight.
Well, no. If I may, it seems like you're indicating that this is helpful because it'll allow other Black folks to realize the importance of serving on these juries.
That's one, and it'll also realize Black folks that if you're going to serve on these juries, don't hide from the inevitable. You know you on social media. And he didn't do this. He didn't hide the inevitable.
Yeah, he didn't hide.
I don't want him to keep on going on social media, but he didn't hide the inevitable. But there's some people that's trying to hide that. They're going to try to hide that.
Yeah.
It is, so we don't have any issues.
Yeah, ain't no problem. Ain't no problem you saying you was at a rally. You could say I'm still going to be impartial.
That's right.
That's not affecting my impartiality. So
that's
what?
Right. That's right. That's right. People get married all the time. They get a bad marriage. They go in and get another marriage, right? I mean, like it happens. Right?
So just because I was in a divorce doesn't mean I'm anti-marriage. I found me a second wife. Don't get
Easy, easy.
Oh boy, let's stay focused.
Last
I
time,
ain't going down that road with you, man.
Don't go down that road.
No, man. I ain't doing it.
Bringing something in that ain't got nothing to do with what we're talking about. Stay focused, brother. Stay
Oh
focused.
my Lord. Anyway.
That's right. Please, all the time.
Oh, Rich, I tell you, come get your brother. Good, thank you for being here. Appreciate you. Oh my goodness. Can we stay on task? So on task here,
Yes.
on a serious note, we don't want people to be discouraged from being on the jury, because
right.
this is where we get into the challenge of not having a jury of your peers. And you address that in depth in your book, Mr. Russell. We've talked about it on the show. And this is, sometimes we just need to be quiet. So Dr. Karen Champion, she said, why are people so quick to speak out in such a cutting edge case? They want a movie deal or to be in the limelight, where the jury is not prepped to stay out of the media in the event that there is an appeal. That's a fair question. Like, how did he get into the media? What's going on? Like, this is
that's where the legal and the cultural meet, because some cultural people got to be in the media. So, Doctor, we understand. We clearly understand. I ain't gonna say what culture, but some cultures need to be. What had happened was, what I saw was, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, but that's another lesson to be learned. But before we move on to the next topic, is really just understanding that if we don't serve on the jury, like I won't say all hope is lost, but it makes it difficult for experts like we have here on the show to litigate on your behalf, because they need to speak to a jury of your peers that will understand, right? That will listen to all sides and hopefully come out with an outcome that's favorable, depending on which side you're sitting on. But being and serving on jury duty, I've thought about it a lot different working with both of you and doing this show, because I'll be honest, I'll raise my hand. I'm not one of those people that are running down to serve jury duty. I'm like, who got time for that? But then when I really understood the importance of having that kind of sound mind in a discussion that could determine someone's life, it's part of our duty to show up and serve, and not just throw the papers in the garbage and not just ignore when it's your time for jury duty. Because think about it like this. It could be someone you know or love, that their life is hanging in the balance because they need a jury that represents who they are. So that's just how real it gets. But hope springs eternal, right? And you and I will still. Mr. Russell is not quite on that train.
I can keep that moving. Hope is springing something. I don't know if it's springing eternal.
Well,
right now, hope is springing a bunch of pissed off New York employees that got to go to work. That's springing. Dr. Greg.
As we move on, the reality of what's happening now, we talked about this. I tell you, somebody is listening to our show and going out and making headlines, because we talked about COVID-19, vaccinations, businesses opening up. What are you going to do when your boss says, get vaccinated and get back to work? Well, the big boss of a lot of New York City employees has instructed everyone to go back to work. And it's causing some challenges. There were some protests. I don't know how much traction it picked up, but now we're dealing with a situation where people are not happy, not pleased, and not feeling safe being back at work. So this—
What you talking about, Willis? What you talking about, Willis? What you talking about?
People don't feel safe.
You said the big boss. What big boss is that?
New York City mayor.
Oh, there we go.
Bill de Blasio.
That's important. I mean, I'm not here to talk one way or the other about de Blasio, but that's important. That's a lot of New York employees, as they say, like Charles Barkley. Guarantee. That's a lot of people that have to go back to work. And I don't even know if he stated that you had to be vaccinated or not. I know he stated that you have to go, but I don't recall if he stated that you have to be vaccinated. But everyone needs to be in that office.
Well, I haven't heard anything on that either, in terms of whether or not return to work is being made conditional upon the receipt of the receiving the vaccine. But we are hearing, of course, is that people are being told that they have to return to work. We talked on a previous segment about, not just the public sector, but the private sector. What happens when the employer says you got to return to work, and whether or not people can just say, no, I'm not. I think we've dealt with that issue sufficiently. Today, though, we want to really discuss what happens if you return to work and then you contract the COVID. Is it a compensable injury under the workers' compensation law? Because, if it happened at work, people naturally think it should be compensable. But, the issue is not that clear, okay? And main reason being that, you could have contracted coronavirus someplace outside of work.
Corona is invisible.
You have this issue of, also delayed symptoms, and then the larger causation. Now, I want to touch upon that a little bit here, because we actually were talking about this at the very beginning of the pandemic. If two of you will recall, and some members of the audience, because the issue back then, of course, we did talk about causation and you being able to establish, but then over the course of the pandemic, certain things happened. Now, New York did not go so far as to declare the infection of COVID, say, a presumption that, listen, if you have it and you work, then we're going to presume it was caught at work and we're going to give you workers' comp. At the same time, though, they also didn't declare it what's considered, or what people term as, a occupational disease. Now, what is an occupational disease? Under the workers' compensation law, it's a disease resulting from the nature of employment and contracted therein. That's fancy way for, I'm going to give you an example. Silicosis. You are a coal miner. You've been working coal miner for years, or you work with hazardous waste, better yet, and you eventually get a disease that is, directly accompanied by that nature of work that you're in.
Yes, stuff like that.
Carpal tunnel. You spend all day hitting the keyboard. You get that bump on your hand and your wrist. There, that's considered an occupational disease. And this is important, right? Because occupational disease has a longer period of time that it manifests itself. Therefore, under the workers' compensation law, you have a longer time to report it. In fact, for an occupational disease, you have 2 years. But when it comes to what's called an accidental injury, that's different. I tripped over those steps at work while I was performing my job. I was, and then therefore it's accidental. It happened. It happened at the job. It was caused by the job. In New York State, you're supposed to report that type of injury to your employee within 30 days. Okay. In New Jersey, I think it's even shorter. It's like 14, 15 days, because those are the types of injuries that they happen right then and there. If it happened at work, you have a duty to report it to your employer, and the employer also has a duty to document it. Okay. And, so it's a different kind of scheme. New York didn't do either one. What they instead did was they said, well, we're going to look at the totality of the incident. We're going to consider the environment within which you work. Okay. Which is a little different from the nature. Okay. Because it's not really about the environment that you work in for occupational purposes, but rather the nature of your employment, the distinctive nature of your employment. I say all that to say that in New York, the Workers' Compensation Board did come out with some guidelines back in June of 2020, this past summer, where they said, listen, we're not going to declare a presumption. We're not going to declare it an occupational disease that automatically gets recognized as an on-the-job injury that's deserving of compensation. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to give more consideration to healthcare workers, to first responders, to transportation workers, to correction officers.
Well, Ed, what do you mean? What do you mean by more consideration? More consideration that they're eligible to be compensated because of the nature of their job and the fact that they're in contact with people that may have COVID?
Yeah, I'm going to give you the exact wording.
Okay.
There was a question because they put it in terms of a Q&A. Which work environments are more likely to result in COVID-19 claims? Individuals who work in an environment where exposure risks are significantly higher are more likely to have compensable COVID-19 claims. Some employees are working closely with the public in locations where COVID-19 exposure is documented, and they included all of these workers. Some workers may also have work-related claims if they directly interact with the public while working, such as retail workers. So it's not that they're saying there's a presumption. It's not that they're saying that this is an occupational disease, that just because if you get COVID-19 and you're a healthcare worker, then bang, you get it. Now, they still require you to provide certain details. You need to have a medical. You need to talk about where you work, how often you work, the type of job duties you perform, especially those involving contact with the public. You need to have a medical report from an authorized workers' comp medical provider stating that your work caused your illness. Now, this is something that's usually required causation-wise for an accidental injury. Right. So you see where the lines are kind of, you know, a positive result is best, but a medical report from an authorized workers' comp medical provider showing a diagnosis via, i.e. a PCR test, or by virtue of an examination by a treating physician may be used.
Ed, stop right there, right? So
okay,
you have this medical examiner, right?
Okay.
He assesses you have COVID. Everybody know you got COVID. You feel all the symptoms, right? I'm just, what more weight does workers' compensation doctor has versus I'm feeling like I got COVID and I go to Dr. Mitchell on 135th Street. He tells me, yeah, you got COVID. Like, unlike an injury, right? With an injury, accidental, you go to the workers' comp so they can ensure that your L5 is actually out of place and not you just making believe is out of place or making sure that the injury is related to the job. Here, since the vid is a ghost, how you going? How you know? Like, does the family compensation doctor hold more weight? And how than my primary care doctor, who's telling me, and this is the point, when you walked in door number one, you didn't have it. And you sat in that office with no windows, because most city offices don't have windows. And most city offices, I know I practiced with the city agency, the Bronx District Attorney's Office, eons ago. It was 4 or 5 of us in one room with no windows, desk facing one another. With no windows, you had an interior office. And then for those who had an exterior office who had a window, guess what? The window never opened.
I imagine that what they mean is that a doctor who's familiar with the workers' compensation guidelines, the rules, a doctor who's going to ask you, well, Royce, okay, you have the COVID. Where do you work? When did you start feeling symptoms? Do you have anybody at home who has had COVID? And if so, when?
So now let's play this out in real time, right?
Okay.
I'm at home. I'm a city employee. I've been doing fine. Now you ask me to go back to work. When I was at home, I wasn't around anybody that had COVID. I was doing the same work that you asked me to do. I was interfacing by way of Zoom, and I was interfacing with those people that I normally interface with, other attorneys and maybe their clients. Now I'm in the office. I'm on the 14th floor. 14th floor got several offices, maybe about 20, 30 people. Out of those 20 and 30 people that's there, 4 or 5 of us, 6 of us. I don't know what the number is going to make it turn where you realize it's because I'm on the 14th floor, but 6 of us get COVID. There's no windows, right? Or the people that got the windows are managers and executives, and maybe they're not even in most of the time. They're in maybe 3 days or 2 days because they got it like that, right? And so now the doctor's asking me all these questions, and I'm not even talking about Slick Rick. When the doctor asks him all those questions, he's going to say no to half of those questions anyway. Have you been in contact with anybody? No, I haven't been in contact with anybody in your family. No, nobody's in my family.
Well, the presumption is that you're telling the truth. Okay. There are no. I'm trying to deal with your question here. I mean, a lot of this is going to be circumstantially based, of course, and there's going to be room. Yeah, and there's going to be room for an individual to possibly be dishonest in order to uphold their claim. However, keep in mind that dishonesty sometimes occurs with peril, right? Because if the employer finds out later on or during some questioning concerning this, say in the event that there is an actual hearing where the insurer's lawyer is contesting the claim, and he asks a question, well, when you caught the COVID, did anybody else in your home have it? Yes, was that before? And you slip and say, yeah, and then you go down that road where he can accuse you of some sort of fraud or being dishonest because in order for you to file a workers' comp claim, you have to file what's called a C3 form where you talk about what occurred, okay? And, you're going to be held to what you write. Now, you don't have to put down what occurred in exhausting detail. In fact, many claimants will keep it general precisely so they don't get caught up later in some sort of, well, I forgot to mention that, and but I was still telling the truth kind of situation. But a lot of this is going to be very much fact-based. And what this indicates is that if you are in a job that causes you by that type of employment to have a lot of contact with the public and you get infected with COVID, then you're going to have an easier time getting your illness injury compensated for under the workers' comp than someone who works isolated from the public, that works, say, in that closed office that you're talking about and not really having contact with many people, is what the board is trying to say, versus someone who works in a hospital where they're working with patients that have COVID, where it's highly more likely, or you work in an occupation, where you're having that constant interaction with the public. You're a corrections officer, right? And you work in this correctional setting, and all these people are in here, and then they're up on top of each other, and you're having this constant, even regardless of you wearing a mask or not, and you're all constantly touching stuff, versus someone who works in a much nicer environment where you're distance, you're having very little contact with the public except maybe possibly your co-workers, because your co-workers simply getting infected, under the case, most of the case law here in this area isn't going to get you compensated. That's not what's going to get you.
And that's the problem that I have with this area of law. I'm at home. I don't see Ed every day. I don't see Dr. Grant every day.
What you trying to say?
I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, right? Then, now you put me in contact with Ed, and you put me in contact with Dr. Grant. Force me to be in contact with them, right? They still fine, but Peter, who's 3 doors over, because the ventilation in our floor is so screwed up, he has it. Now it's through the vents or what have you. Now I got it, and now you.
Yeah, it's coming in through the vents, man.
Hey, look, where it come from?
Yeah.
What?
I know where it come from. You was hanging out with my man last night at the spot.
Well, that's going to be the argument. And so now here it is. I was hanging out with my man at the spot, coming home, and everything was great. As a matter of fact, You asked me to get tested before I started work, and I showed you. Here go my test. I'm negative. Now I'm at work. 3 weeks into it, now I'm positive. It's that D train, right? And meanwhile, you still on the news talking about, hey, we want the trains to come back to capacity. We want everybody to be on the train. Like, I don't know. There's some real.
Listen, let's play devil's advocate here, bro. I'm kind of one of the wrong guys to ask about this because, and I'm not throwing anybody under the bus, but I last week I needed something from the city and I couldn't get it because of this shutdown. And I'm a little mad. I mean, I'm like, damn, man, I need my stuff, man. And where y'all at? You know what I mean? Like, so there's a group of people, you know, in terms of the city that want folks to go back to work, man. I'm sorry.
No, I fully understand it. I understand it from an economic standpoint. I get it from an economic standpoint.
You know, and there's a lot of people that do business with those municipal workers. Have you seen that downtown? It look like a damn ghost town.
Look, I understand that 100%. But let's call it for what it is if we're going to call it, right?
Yeah, they need that.
There's going to be some casualties.
Yeah.
And somebody needs to say there's going to be some casualties. Right?
Now listen, I love my city workers. I feel like the city really needs to go overboard, above and beyond duty to make sure that those workplaces are safe, that they're cleaned a few times a day, you know, to make sure that you know everybody's like distance if they're not already, putting up the partitions, you know what I'm saying?
Do the work.
You know, providing the testing kits that they could take it home and you know, like here, you know, and providing real regimens. I mean, listen, don't get me wrong. I feel like, you know, first we had this fool in the White House doing very little. And now that we got the resources, we need to take advantage of it and make sure we do everything possible to prevent folks from you know, getting this stuff, man.
And to your point, you said, hey, there's a group of people that are out there and they're like, hey, where's my stuff? I need my stuff. There's another group of people that you haven't bumped into that when they go get their stuff, the person that's on the other side of the window is pissed off that they're there.
Yeah.
And tell me if you going to get your stuff. Tell me which experience is going to be more frustrating.
Yeah.
You went to the window and nobody was there, or you went to the window and the person that you dealt with doesn't want to be there.
Yeah. So that's a whole nother show. That's a whole nother show. And yeah, Deborah is talking about what happened to her father. And, you know, just really the fact that they found asbestos was what contributed to his death. And then she also mentioned a lot of city workers won't take the shot because they feel it's going to give them COVID. I mean, and that's true. Any vaccination you take, you get a little bit of the virus. That's what builds up the antibodies. And Dr. Champion said it's prudent and the responsibility to make the work environment safe, which means limited people. Maybe the ones who are vaccinated can go, but others shouldn't be forced. That's interesting. And Richard says, nothing's going to happen. That's what we're saying, Richard. Like, nothing's going to happen. And she said she thinks it's reckless of the mayor to open up the city without job security, safety. Wow. It's a lot to digest. And there, where New York goes, a lot of the country follows, right? A lot of private companies are going to follow what is happening by virtue of what the mayor decides, because that's one of the largest workforce we have in the country. And, you know, this is a huge opportunity for New York City to either really do well or plummet right back to the craziness that we saw before, because COVID has not disappeared. So I'm very concerned for all the city workers that are affected by this and don't have a choice. And they're not going back to an office where they're isolated in their office. They have to be in public spaces. They have to interact with the public. So this is major.
Dr. Grant, here's a scenario for you, Ed. And listen to this, Dr. Grant. The call came through the other day, right? Guy said, look, you know, I had COVID. I was forced to go back to work. When I got to work, they sat me in the hallway. All the workers was working in their area. They sat me in the hallway for 2 weeks. I had to sit in the hallway because I had COVID. I didn't have the vaccine, but I had COVID some time ago. They forced me back to work. I didn't take the vaccine because I had the antibodies for COVID. This is what folks, this is their life. And the employer sat them in the hallway for 2 weeks. Then after the second week, allowed them to join everybody else. City employee.
So wait a minute. So
file a lawsuit.
So he comes up positive.
He had COVID. Let's say he had COVID in December, or let's say he had COVID in January. He's forced to go back to work in February, and he says, "Hey, look, I had COVID," and they're like, "Yo, sit over here."
So him having had COVID
got him in the rubber room.
Got him in the hallway. Yeah, because I used to get kicked out of English class for talking.
That's right. That's why
I put me in the hallway.
Yeah, see, I knew you knew that. I knew you would know what that is.
That ain't right. I remember that.
There you go. That ain't right? But
you might pull the gun on me in school while I was in that hallway.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What? Yeah. Schools are dangerous in Harlem. Yeah. Yeah, but we talking about the 80s. The 80s was a little rougher. There were no metal detectors.
Yeah, look, now you got multiple schools, so be easy.
Yeah. So anyway, man, that's listen, that is
that person's going to court.
Is that a lawsuit? Will that
person? I'm asking that person.
Well, yeah, we gotta delve into more of those facts. I'm also thinking damages. I'm thinking about what exactly the story was because I had COVID. Not vaccinated. I'd love to speak to that person, Royce.
All right. Well, you'll be dialing your phone soon, brother.
Rich said you should have come to school in the Bronx.
Wildcats for the boogie downs always want to up stages.
Hey, that's the way it is.
You think that's a big deal?
That's what we do, brother. That's what we do.
Hey, listen, man. If that was happening in the BX or they had two instead of one, I'm sorry, man. I'm sorry.
This is major. Dr. Champion said the same thing about the variants, that they're greater now. Jobs are going to be facing discrimination issues. So there are layers, and the impacts of COVID-19, they're still being discovered. Like the studies are just starting on all the impacts of what this global pandemic has done. And here in New York City, we're talking about employment. We're talking about mental health. We already had shows about, what's happening and what people are dealing with. The numbers in every area have gone up, from abuse to suicide attempts to depression. Like, this is serious. And where the legal meets the cultural is when people are unstable and then they end up with confrontations with law enforcement and it goes south. These are the things that we're concerned about, and where the advocacy is necessary from all of the groups that have been on the ground. They didn't just show up because of COVID-19. They've been advocating for equity. They've been advocating for access. They've been advocating for resources. And this is really a time, once again, everyone needs to pay attention and wake up. In whatever area you live in, there's still elections that are happening in states. New York City, where we have elections, we have special elections coming up next month. You really need to look at who you're putting in place to advocate for all of the areas that are going to be affected in the rebuilding of not just the economy, but everyone's life post this COVID trauma that we've been experiencing.
Yep. As a practitioner, I said that and I gave that example partly in light, but that's a true example. That's the phone calls that are coming through. And we all know that law is created by cases that happen. Yeah, it might be far-fetched that, bringing this case to court, but you get a class action lawsuit, 20 people on the floor, 19 get it. You start moving in that venue, in that area. Now you have precedent, which is cases that happened before that other attorneys can use to establish their case. There's going to be one that's going to be successful.
Yeah, I mean, what's happening right now, and I think we mentioned this on a previous segment, where in a very uncertain landscape, I would imagine that employer called whatever lawyer that represents them normally, and even that lawyer wasn't sure what to say other than to say, you know what, just isolate them, just keep them away from the other workers, because if and maybe not I mean, listen, that factual scenario, it's very dependent on.
You can see the attorney. You can see
Yeah.
the attorney, as you just said. And I want our audience to really understand this, because you're getting the insight into how attorneys make their decision, right? That attorney, like you just said, say isolate him. I'd rather deal with his 2 weeks of damages if he sues us, if he even makes it past summary judgment, than to deal with the other 14 workers that may get it, and they're going to point to that guy, and they're going to point to an employer for letting that guy sit with them.
And God forbid we talking about a wrongful death suit because the person got it and died.
Right. So I can understand why he was sitting in the hallway. I can understand it from a legal perspective. It might have been overbroad. It might have been presumptuous, but definitely from the lawyer's perspective, I'd rather pay out 5 than pay out $5 million. And that's pure economics.
Yeah, Karen said, you better look out for the class action lawsuits that are going to be happening as a result. She said, y'all better get ready. So looks like
Ed already got his check. Busy. Not a class for English. I think he got his check already. They like, yeah, you guys it was $1.90. Well, you know how you get those class actions. You get like the check, only $1.90. You didn't even know you were down. So it was a bunch of people,
Yeah, the one you get in the mail, right? With the
you know what I'm saying.
With the perforated and everything.
Yeah, well, see, there you go.
Well, I mean, as we know, there's quite a lot going on, and she has a question: can a person opt to stay home?
Well, here's the answer to this. I had a client. Her kid was studying at home. I had no choice. The employer said, you need to come back to work. She said, I have to stay home with my kid. My kid is in 7th grade. Who else is going to do it? She worked for a New York state agency, and the last part of their agency has an E on it. So you can figure it out. They only had two other letters before that. So it had an E on it. We're talking about here educating folks. It had an E on it. She lost her job because she wouldn't come in.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So the answer is yes, unless you have some extenuating circumstances there, and then you're getting into another whole ball game about whether or not that employee is going to say, well, use your sick leave or apply for FMLA, which is unpaid leave. And then, at that point, I think it's going to get a little rough because you're going to be sitting at home with no money. Or, after you exhaust your sick leave and your paid leave, then things are going to get rough. I mean, the short answer is that, yes. And, if you could make the case maybe that the employer isn't taking adequate steps to keep you protected. And I mean, I had a case recently where a group of workers asked or petitioned the employer for safer working conditions, cleaner conditions, face masks, etc. And the employer retaliated against a few of those employees and ended up firing them. And they ended up going to the National Labor Relations Board. And, the National Labor Relations Board upheld their complaint, and there was even an injunction and so forth. So, that's possibly an avenue. Now, I'm not sure if any public employees have filed that sort of claim with the Public Employees Relations Board, which is the public employment equivalent of the National Labor Relations Board. But, that's something to think about as well,
Absolutely. I think there are a lot of questions. We raised it. This is fair warning, not just to talk about what's happening with New York City workers, but there have been many articles. I think the Post put in an article, the Times talking about, well, a lot of the businesses are going to take their cues from what they see happening with the city. So we're going to have to wait and see on how all of this plays out. Deborah has another comment. They told us we were mandated no excuses, but we keep our area cleaned every hour and provide everything for your department. And we want each and every one of you to be safe, that you don't have a choice. So you have to use wisdom, right? We said that before as we were going through this whole pandemic together, that we shouldn't have to wait for this crisis for you to wash your hands. Like those some simple things that you need to do to make sure that you're wearing a mask. Some people are listening to some of the CDC guidelines that came out that said if you were vaccinated, you don't have to wear a mask if you're by yourself. So there are a lot of conflicting things that are being shared. Just use wisdom. First of all, start taking care of yourself. Boost your immune system and make sure that you're doing things to make your body one that can repel, even if you're exposed to it, even if you get it, because we have people that have survived COVID-19, right? So it's not an automatic death sentence, but we know what it can do. So if we can take better care of ourselves, that's one of the precautions that we can take. And just like Deborah said, you're cleaning, you're making sure that everyone is being very conscious and cautious. That's one of the ways, while we're still dealing with the unknown of what all of these cases and all of the outcry around being forced back to work is going to look like, whether these cases will actually rule in the favor of the employee. So there's more to be seen, but let's end on a high note. Little good news to share. How about that? Your girl is on the 2021 MWBE Power 50 list. Whoop, whoop. So talking about city and state and, you know, the work that we all do, I'm excited to share this news. It just came out yesterday or the day before. So
well, that's your jersey number next to your name, huh?
Yeah. You said there's a jersey number?
I said, that's your jersey number, right? That's not your age. That's your jersey number, right?
I'll take that. I'll take that. I'll take that. I'll take that one.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Champion. Okay. Absolutely. And yes, Richard, we got to keep our own areas clean. Thank you, Monica. Appreciate all of that. So just ending on a high note, I know we deal with a lot of information that can be a little heavy when we talk about where the legal meets the cultural, but we also want you to be informed, not just to go around and be in a cloud or live under a rock somewhere. You need to be aware of what's going on. People that you love and care about are affected by a lot of the cases and the information that we share on this show. We thank you for being a part of our family. This is season 2. You know, this was birthed out of the need of being able to empower you with information. The questions that you have 2 legal experts here that can give you the kind of feedback that is necessary. You know who to call if you get into a situation where you need that kind of support to get justice. So with that being said, I'm going to let our co-host, and thank you, Richard. Thank you, Monica, Dr. Champion. We appreciate you, Deborah. Thank you for being here. Everyone that's catching the replay, we appreciate you. We wouldn't have a show if we didn't have an audience. So thank you for being with us. Any parting words, Señor Pichardo, Esquire?
Well, I think you know, with this discussion of COVID, I just think it's my responsibility to let the audience know, and this is no secret. I put it on my Facebook page that, you know, I got the vaccine, and you know, to each his own as to the personal decision you're making, but I certainly would advocate that everyone get vaccinated. You know, I myself got the J&J. You know, you don't have to do that one, but yeah. So I just wanted to, you know, say that and say farewell, and thanks for joining us today.
What I would like to do is just pose a question to our audience, and maybe we get some feedback on our next show. You work for an employer and you work for the state, and you know those trains are crowded, and you know you can catch anything on a train. Do you take the next train or the next train or the next train and punch in a little late? Or do you go for Employee of the Month and catch that train that is crowded after you heard my man go? That's a decision. It's a little light, but it's definitely heavy, because then you could be written up for coming in late. And what are the discretionary tools does an employer have, and an employee, what advantages that the employee has in order to use those tools in this time of the unknown? You know that phone is going to ring soon, Ed. You know it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, to be continued, but we're on the journey together. Yes. Dr. Champion said, buy a car. I'm done.
I'm out.
Poor environment.
Thanks, Doc.
Oh.
We hear you. Buy a car.
All right. Oh my
There you go.
goodness.
Buy a
Peace
car.
to
Buy an
everyone.
electric car. Buy an
We're
electric
done now. We're done. Doc said buy a car. We are
That's
done.
it.
That's
That's
it.
Drop the Mic.
Yeah, we
See you
done.
next
That's
week. Remember, our special guest, Dr. Jeff Gardere, is going to be with us. Bye for now, everyone.